UX Podcast is funded by James and myself, together with any contributions we can get from you, our listeners. You can contribute any amount you like, whenever you like, by visiting uxpodcast.com/support.
UX Podcast Episode 247.
Hello, I'm Per Axbom.
And I'm James Royal Lawson.
And this is UX Podcast. We are in Stockholm, Sweden, and you're listening in 195 countries all over the world, from Andorra to India.
Sid Harrell is a UX researcher and product manager who got hooked on civic tech at early 2010s hackathons. Sid has helped US city, county, federal and state agencies unlock the power of technology to serve constituents. She's worked with organisations like the Centre for Civic Design, Code for America and 18F.
Plus, she's been a guest with us before, 2 years ago. She talked to us in episode 194 and shared some great tips on how to carry out successful user research. And I've actually pointed people to that episode quite often.
It's actually part of our Introduction to UX playlist.
Oh, yeah.
Which is actually not called that. It's called something else. It is called Getting Started in UX. We have as a playlist on Spotify with 20-odd selected episodes that we think are good if you're just getting into all this stuff we talk about.
And that will be in the show notes.
It will be now. But Sid, though, she has recently released a book, A Civic Technologist's Practice Guide. A friendly guide for technology people who work or want to work in the public sector.
And also, remember to stay with us, because after our chat to Sid, we have our post-interview reflections.
You know, when you said remember, I thought you were going to end the show. So did you actually write the entire book during lockdown?
No. I started it in January.
Still, January?
Yes. So there's a bit of a story there. I actually had a cocktail with Erica Hall right before the holidays last year. And I was sort of raving to her that people kept asking me to write a book, and I couldn't imagine actually doing it. What would I be able to write about that people would want? And she told me about this book that she's writing, to kind of try and shift something in the design world. And all of a sudden, the pieces fell into place that I could potentially write a sort of a grounding document for civic tech. And I thought, oh, that's something I could do, rather than a really, one more take on UX research when she and Dana and others have done such a good job, or a sort of critique book about civic tech. I could write an onboarding guide. And I was so excited that I actually got out my phone in the taxi going home and got out Google Docs Mobile and typed up an outline with my thumbs.
Oh, wow.
And I got home and I told my husband, I said, you know what? I think I figured it out. I think I figured out a book I want to write. And he looked at it and he said, well, this is a really good idea. And you know what? You better get that done before the election. And I said, oh, you're absolutely right. Because if the Democrats win, we're going to see a rush into civic tech in America, I think, because there's going to be an awful lot of restoration and rebuilding and excitement about the public sector again. If the Democrats lose at the national level, my guess is there's going to be a bit of a rush into state level tech. And, it'll be quite interesting to see what states like California, where I live, do in that situation.
Yeah, so I guess also there'll be a degree of kind of defense of the tech.
Yes.
In certain scenarios.
Yes. And so I had a deadline. So I started writing January 8th, and the pandemic in San Francisco started, circling around in February. There was this ship off the coast that had a group of people who had been exposed and some were infected. So we started hearing pretty early from our mayor that lockdown was likely. And we went in, I think, on March 16th. And I was not quite halfway done with the first draft, I think.
Wow. I mean, to me, that's amazing, and a testament to what an expert you are in this field, really. But I just
want to say, though, Per, I mean, that's a wonderful example, though, of having clear vision and strong deadline.
Yeah.
And then combined to that, you had an fortunate opportunity in maybe lockdown that actually gave you the space to do it. So kind of the serendipity, the three things combining there is really, really interesting.
I mean, you're right. I didn't have a lot of weekend plans in March and April, which was I had contracted with my editor to start on May 1st. So that was really, the draft had to be finished and the chapters had to be through their first reviews by May 1st.
And also the conversation that instigated it all. I mean, just knowing and realizing that you need your allies to find your path.
Yes, so much.
And your structure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to just clear out this word. That because, I mean, UX Podcast is an international podcast. And
yes.
I mean, I don't think I used this word too much even before we interviewed you and Dana Chisnell. Civic. What does civic tech mean?
Civic tech means, in the US in particular, I think it is a bit American-centric, although many people in the UK and Australia would recognize it too. It's the idea that we should bring the best of tech from the private sector, and you can think of that a number of ways, whether it's people or practices or actual technologies, to the public sector, and that we should have public digital goods that are as good as the goods we can purchase. So your government website where maybe you register to vote or register your car or, pay your tax should be just as good as what you experience when you go on a social network or an e-commerce site. And all of the mechanisms to do that.
So you differentiate then between like public sector tech and civic tech? Civic
tech, I think, has an explicit connotation of improvement. I think government tech is more inclusive. And I chose civic tech specifically because I was trying in the book to speak to the people who want to improve the situation of government tech. In the US, definitely in the UK, in a lot of larger countries, you have these heavy procurement infrastructures and a lot of bureaucracy in a national level government, certainly. And then sometimes in local government, you have low capacity. So the existing government tech may not be everything that people hope from public digital goods. And civic tech explicitly takes a perspective that people from the private sector or people who have private sector expertise and experience in tech have a role to play in improving that alongside the public servants who have chosen government tech as a career from the beginning.
So it's almost like the activist word for public sectors, like the person who wants to make real change.
The person wants to make real change. And one thing that many people claim for it is it's not just government tech. So it can be technology for mutual aid or for people, right, without the participation of a government who want to have a better interaction as a community or something like that.
Exactly. A community tech, I guess, is all these different kind of ways of slicing it all up.
Public interest tech is another one that tends to get used by academics. Have switched over from e-government to public interest tech, I think. They may not be the same thing, but...
And now for any listeners thinking that it's sort of specific to the US, I can say, having worked almost 10 years now with the National Health Services in Sweden, this book really made me feel seen and made me feel heard.
That makes me so happy.
I really understood stuff and was able to now find the vocabulary for explaining stuff to other people. Because what usually happens when you get into the space after having worked with the commercial sectors for so long is that you go in and you think, I'm going to change everything. I mean, now I have so much experience. And then you hit a wall and you realize, oh, it's so different. Right. It's so very, very different.
Things are the way they are for reasons, actually.
Yes.
We still want to change them, but if we don't know the reasons, we can't just come in and say, all right, we're going to do Agile.
Yeah, exactly.
What's interesting there, Per, though, is when I'm reading through it, I was reflecting on the fact that I've worked with public sector organizations, but also large and small Swedish organizations, international organizations, private sector, and in many ways I recognize lots of these aspects from these, especially these big internationals or internationals that I've worked with, that they're very close to public sector in many ways in which the systems work, especially if you're working with the enterprise UX, I think, because I've done a lot of work with intranets and enterprise UX over the years. And when you're dealing with internal systems, you can be into a lot of similar issues, I think.
I absolutely agree. I think there's an institutional sector that we don't quite know entirely what to call. Some of it is government, some of it is traditional public sector NGOs. Sometimes you can even think about healthcare or finance or education in some of the same ways. But the thing that defines an institution for me is that it acts on people not just at scale, but over time. And that requires a different strategy for improving it than, some of these apps may last months or years. But if we're talking about making a change in a government or a really significant institution, it's usually decades and often centuries that we're talking about in terms of history and, types of technological change it's been through in the past. And so it has a natural and appropriate resistance to sort of the ups and downs and fads of commercial technology. And yet, sometimes a failure, which is often connected to more broad failures of institutional inclusion, right, along class or racial or citizenship status lines, but often a failure to meet people where they are in terms of the ability to interact with it. And so as we're starting to connect with these centuries-old institutions using these latest technologies that may have been in place for months or years, like our smartphones, we're really out of sync in terms of the time scale and figuring out how to harmonize technologies, software that we can change. If we mess something up, we can change it in a day. We can put out a new application in a matter of months. But the values and the kind of deep design values and characteristics of an institution may have been evolving over a really long time. And if we don't think about that, we aren't going to be successful. The change is just going to bounce off. And if we do succeed, it may not really stick and it may not do what we want.
Exactly. You have to think long term in a whole different way.
Yeah.
I think when I was reading it again, once again reflecting on how my career has been and the things I've worked with, and some of the lists you had dotted through the book, I was thinking, my word, these are really not just lists that you need to preach to civic people. I mean, I think the first one you had was about axes of privilege that impact
yes,
the way you experience the world, I think is the phrase you used. And of course, me and Per, we tick off, I think, every single one of them.
Yeah, I was reading through that. Oh, that's me. Okay, that's me. That's
yeah, I mean, we're men, we're white, we're heterosexual,
Yeah.
we don't have any disabilities, and I do actually speak Swedish, so I speak the majority language in my area too, so it was a full house there. But it's something me and Per talk about this a fair bit. We're quite aware about how white, male and privileged we are, which doesn't always make it easier. Being aware of it actually sometimes makes it even worse, I think. But come back to these lists. They're really, really useful general lists that anyone could use in their work and should.
Thank you. I mean, I won't hide from you that a side motivation was that after spending the last 8 years exclusively in civic tech, I start to think that maybe the way that you can be successful in civic tech is a way that we all ought to think about tech more generally, in terms of what we're contributing to and how we go about the work of making new things or better things. And my contention is it's more important that they be better than that they be new.
Exactly, yeah. The focus on actually improving something.
Right, rather than just innovating it.
Exactly. I'm thinking you always can come in with the tools that you will have always used. I love the examples you have of, well, you're using Slack, you're using Google Docs, and you come in and you expect to be able to use all those tools that you usually do.
Yes.
And again, you hit that wall and you realize, okay, I'm not allowed to. But then for me, that's sort of what UX is about. I have to adapt because that is my role. That is what I do because I am the mediator. I'm supposed to be able to adapt. So unless I'm able to do that, I won't be able to work in this space.
I think that's right. And I think it's often easier for designers who see themselves that way. To say, oh, I need to meet my government, career staff partners where they are. That is something that feels very aligned to somebody who practices UX in that way. Not always to every other discipline. I mean, it depends on the person. But it can be tricky if you are really invested in a tool set that you've curated and you've put together and it really feels right to you and it gives you your maximum efficiency to say, okay, I can't have any of this and I can't get it from my partners inside of a year and a half or something. So how do I shift my practice over to these tools that are maybe third or fourth best, maybe, and see if I can identify the things that are really important rather than the tools. So it's not so much Google Docs, it's the fact that we can easily, in real time, co-edit a document. Can I use the less good Microsoft Word? And so, can I choose to use that? Can I figure out, how to communicate if I don't have Slack? Can I create some email groups and make that kind of flowing communication accessible? It forces you to identify what's really important about it, which, of course, as a UX person, I also think is fascinating. So it's not really the emojis in Slack, although those are fun.
You mentioned at one point in the book about to do with service delivery, civic service delivery and interfaces, that adoption is really important, and that the key there is that the new thing you're doing has to be better than the current.
It has to be better
or interface. Yeah, to succeed. Which absolutely. But it started to make me, when I was thinking about other mechanisms like the procurement and the understanding your organization and getting the buy-in and all these kind of stuff that take time and effort, energy. How do you measure? Because if you got to that point of having it in place, that's when you're going to know whether it's succeeded. So how do you go about measuring that the future thing you're trying to lobby for and to put into place is going to be better than the current interface or current thing?
So I think we lean a lot on prototypes in civic tech, partly because often folks who've worked in big institutions that tend to do big procurements don't have a lot of experience of even seeing something, a throwaway thing, built fast. And so we made it. Oh, we tested it in one session and people just couldn't work with this part. We changed it and we came back tomorrow with something else. That reality can sort of transform someone's understanding of what technology can do and how empowered they can be to work with technology if they have access to the right tools. So it's very much a show, let's do a small pilot and then figuring out how to do the pilot in an inclusive way. So once again, it's not we embed our privileges, me as a white abled woman saying like, oh, we're not going to worry about Spanish for, a while, leave that to later in California. That's not really okay. But if we can do a quick small prototype in English and Spanish and test it with people, then we have a really good look at how we're doing in our majority language. The Canadian federal government actually has such an advanced and beautiful bilingual practice. They're one of my favorite groups out there. And I'm going to forget the guy's name. I might be able to find the thread later. But somebody posted on Twitter last year that one of their web groups had decided that they were going to have a norm that you could speak whichever language you felt most comfortable in. And if your colleagues who felt more comfortable in the other language couldn't quite get it, then they could ask questions in their own language. But there is a strong enough pressure on bilingual competency in Canada that it really works. And I wish we had that in California. I'm not actually a Spanish speaker, and I feel that deficit a lot.
So use of prototypes. I mean, it's a very, I suppose, agile way of working in that sense. Do you risk then that you get stuck on an iteration?
Yes. Absolutely. And you can get stuck at a low maturity stage where something hasn't been made robust, but has been pushed out for a big test. Budget cycle happens, administration change happens, something happens, and nothing further gets funded. But it's kind of useful to people already, so it stays in place. And so I love the use of prototypes, but I also like to think about them as a promise in a way that a prototype is a promise, and it's kind of okay in a high resource private sector environment to say, okay, we're going to make this and then we're just going to throw it away. People have another option, everything will be okay. It's more complicated in a lower resource public sector environment because you're saying, hey, look at this better world we could all have. But actually, if we haven't figured out all that work to improve the back end systems, to make sure that this nice web front end actually has something driving it, to change the policies if they need to be changed, to procure a more modern hosting solution, perhaps, to help people set up a release cycle, all that stuff. If you haven't done it, then this better world you've shown people kind of loses its promise.
So, that must take some managing or training. How would you deal with the situation that you're someone who been involved in civics, that you're going to have that drive. You've realised a thing that you want to really push for. You've got as far as funding and a prototype, and it's now going to get put on a shelf, or you're going to throw it away. I mean, how do you manage that aspect of it? It must be tough.
Yeah, it sucks. I think everyone who's been in this a while has some scars. And one of the things I think is really important is community, and taking care of each other and taking care of ourselves. I think I say somewhere in the book that you will lose, and not just little battles, but you will have significant losses and things that don't work out. And I've got a couple projects I could talk about that would still raise my heart rate. But the way to turn those to good, I think, is to talk about them and write about them and figure out what happened, retrospective work that then gets shared with the larger community and lets us all build a little further. In some ways, that was a big motive for the book, was to, well, let me back up. I went to an informal conference a couple of years ago called the Union of Concerned Government Technologists. It was an American conference. It was kind of secret, invitational thing. And there was a session that I attended called Let's Make New Mistakes. And I was really heavily struck by that session with the idea that we keep bringing new people into the field. We keep having new people start with a different government and running up against the same problems. And what can we do as a field to consolidate the learnings from all those stories and figure out a few things so that we can get on to making the next set of mistakes that are hopefully a little more advanced and a little less, brutally harmful.
Well, I can attest to that because I've killed a lot of prototypes over the past years.
Yeah.
And I think, but I continue to stay on, I think, because it's important to me to keep telling the stories of those killed prototypes, because that helps people understand going forward. So what things have we learned and what can we do differently? But that also dovetails with the things you wrote about risk, because that's also something we hear a lot in the tech space, that it's good to take risks. It's good to fail even, because that means
you're learning
something. Whereas in the civic space, then it's problematic because it's taxpayer money. And
at a starting point, sometimes it's really important things about people's lives.
Yes, it's life critical. It's especially in healthcare, but I mean, most civic tech is life critical in some way.
It could be even democracy at the center of it.
Democracy critical, yes.
Yes.
Yes, so failure has a different cast. And, little tests failing, prototype failing, not that big a deal, but something significant failing can cause serious harm, and on a smaller scale can wreck careers. That doesn't usually happen to Silicon Valley technologists, right? You have a big failure, you write a good blog post about it, everybody loves you, get hired again. That doesn't happen with agency heads and CIOs necessarily in the same way. So there is a career risk that is very different from private sector tech. When I was chief of staff of 18F, I actually had to buy professional liability insurance in case the agency was investigated or sued, because I could be personally named.
You were exposed to a personal risk.
Yes.
Through that employment.
Yes.
I'm always learning new things about America and getting surprised about how it works.
So many of our founding stories actually have to do with litigation. For all the Americans out there, that Stamp Act that we talk about as one of the triggers for the revolution was about seals stamped on lawsuits because the colonists were suing the heck out of each other.
Oh, wow.
And that was one of the taxations from King George that they really objected to, was paying extra for lawsuits. But yes, so there's that, there's that kind of personal risk, and then there's risk of doing real harm. We've seen with the pandemic and our crummy systems for unemployment support. I worked with Dana actually in June on a study that was intended to just hear the stories of Americans who were trying to access benefits during the pandemic, and they were horrible, difficult, stories that people were good enough to share with us. Of dealing not just with interfaces, but with systems that had not been necessarily designed with people in mind, and where there were those intentions on the part of the officials who designed them maybe hadn't been implemented in such a way to actually carry out the good intent. And behind that in some states is a policy of not wanting people to access benefits. And that's actually one of the things I talk about in the book, is that you can't fix a policy problem with technology.
So what you're saying there basically is like there are dark patterns being deployed in public sector services, digital services, and you're effectively in a position, because it's policy, your hands are tied. You've got to implement effectively, or you can't do anything about them.
Right. The example I talk about in the book is marijuana policy, right? It's a patchwork of legality here. It's by state. You have some states where it's completely illegal. You have many states where it's legal for medical purposes, and the requirements for getting a card vary. And then you have some states where it's legal for all purposes. And then in the states where it's legal for all purposes, you have questions about whether we expunge old convictions, people who were put on trial and convicted under old marijuana laws. But it doesn't make any sense to proceed with a great system for requesting to have your record cleared if the policy in your area isn't to clear records. It's sort of like that's an interesting thought experiment, but you won't be able to get anywhere unless the state attorney or district attorney in your area has a policy that they wish to remove those criminal records from people's past in these cases.
So as I'm playing back our conversation in my head now, I'm realizing that we're making it sound as if it's a huge struggle. It's a real pain to get into civic tech. There are so many things to think about. So I want to give you a minute to tell us why you should still get into it, because why is it so rewarding?
Because you do actually get to work on things and improve things that are life critical. So, making it easier for people to get public benefits, making it easier for people to communicate with their elected representatives, making it easier for communities to work together after a disaster, making it easier for people to do participatory planning. There's a really cool civic tech project that actually started at a hackathon many years ago. It's called streetmix.net, and I think you can access it anywhere. It's totally free, and it's a drag and drop street design tool. And what people can do with it is design a street they like and bring it to a public meeting. They can print it out, and it sort of puts them on a footing with professionals who have all these tools to draw to say, well, this is how I would like the streets in my community to be designed. And that, without ever having a paid staff member, has, I believe, had something like 100,000 plans made and printed on the system, and really started to change some of the power dynamics in community meetings around that. That's really cool. I geek out about changes like that. And even though it's not always easy, I'm working now with the California courts, working on digital services for people who go to court without a lawyer. It's tough. But on the other hand, if you sit in a few courtrooms and see the kinds of reasons that people are in court and what they're facing and how important that judicial branch of government is to democracy, it's very, very motivating to work on it. You do need the posse that we have, though, for sure. You need your friends.
Yes.
So reflecting what you're saying, so that all this gives you the chance to work with the building blocks of a good society.
Yes. Yes, you put it better than I did. I like that.
I'm sorry, that's not. I'm the host of this. I'm not meant to do that. Sorry.
Oh, no. We're just having a conversation.
That was a summary.
Summary, yeah.
Yeah.
No, because like we elect governments. Governments can be crap. Governments can be good. We've got policies we hate or don't like and stuff. We've even got maybe neighbours we don't get on with at times and stuff. But at the end of the day, we all want to live as part of a society,
yes,
and community that makes us feel happy and safe.
Yes, I hope so. That's not a given in the U.S.
No.
In October 2020, but I hope there are enough of us that do. That starts to be a given again in time.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah. So everyone read the book, get inspired, and get into civic tech because you won't regret it, really.
Yes, please do. We need more of us. We need lots more of us, and it's a friendly field and so much fun.
Thanks for being with us, Sid.
My pleasure.
So for me, I actually see how Sid's book is useful both from a therapeutic perspective, in that if you do work in civic tech, you recognize so much and you feel you're not alone, and you remember that, yes, it sometimes is a struggle, but there are reasons for this, and there's also a reason why you're doing it. And there's so many things that she gives you to think about, to actually reflect on why you're doing it and why it's important and what you should focus on as well, which are really fantastic. And of course, the other aspect is, if you haven't worked in civic tech before, having all this knowledge wealth that Sid is sharing is so useful. I mean, you'll shave years of learning off going into civic tech just by reading the book, I think.
Or perhaps feel less alone, feel less uncomfortable.
Yes.
Feel like someone's supporting you, even if they're not directly supporting you at the moment, perhaps. I mean, it's really good read. And what I do like as well, I mentioned this briefly in the interview, that this is applicable to more than just civic tech. I'm not completely sure how much Sid realises that in what she's written, but these aspects of it, and especially I think some of the lists she's got dotted through the book, giving like a summary of things you can do in various situations, or how you can, checklists. These are okay, maybe sometimes with just a little bit of a rewrite or a tweak here and there, but they're completely applicable to almost every type of context and work I've been involved with, and possibly listeners too. So the one we said in the show was about the privilege and checking your axes of privilege and checking how privileged you are. And that list was, are you cisgender male? Are you white, heterosexual? Do you have any disabilities? Do you speak the majority language in your region? Great list to start off with. But there are other ones too. The one you can follow on from that and checking, basically, if you have got substantial privilege, what can you do in order to support underrepresented or or people who are not as privileged as you in the work you're doing, and partners and so on. And that's a great little list.
And a further privilege that most of us have just by knowing tech is that we know about tools, we know how the web works, probably a lot more than the people around us, the stakeholders around us, which means that we can also spend time helping people learn more. So she actually gives some tips at the end of the book that I think are just wonderful around this. She calls them techniques of professional inclusion, and just holding office hours for people who need to make design decisions, bringing in speakers for lunch and learns. I mean, I know we do these things within consultancies and usually at agencies, you have lunch and learns, but of course, it's hugely useful in these contexts as well. And just starting clubs for learning new techniques like web writing and CSS, and even sending a weekly. This is something I've done actually, sending a weekly email newsletter to a broad set of project stakeholders, just helping them see what's happening within the space that they are actually working within the tech space.
I mean, just that about kind of like clubs and things about various things. We've got the example of Spotify and their guilds, which I know quite a few companies have picked up on over the years, which is effectively internal clubs to help spread knowledge, to highlight various issues, and to maybe take action on certain things that people find they get passionate about. That, which is another one of Sid's lists, is the whole thing that when you found an area that excites you, and being a member of these guilds is possibly a sign that you are excited about something, even if it's not a civic project, tech project you're getting involved with. But that little list of questions was an excellent way of reflecting on what you are passionate about and want to work with or are working with. So where would I act in order to relieve the most pain for users? Where would I act in order to relieve pain and free up capacity for maintainers or the stewards of a project? Where would I act to make my changes last? Where can I get access and support in order to act? I mean, if you just tweak them a little bit, you can see their usefulness in any kind of organization.
Oh, definitely. And it's fun. She didn't mention it on the show, but she actually refers to it several times through the book. She calls this space a teenager, in the sense that it's not that old. And I think that's important to understanding the space as well, and being sort of reflective on this is why some things may feel like a struggle, because of course we're all learning together, and this book is allowing us to learn a lot faster about what's been going on for the last 15 years.
Yeah, and that aspect of being a teenager is something that Lisa Welshman used in her book, Web Digital Governance. So it's a very similar thing that she's been picked up on, and Sid's picking up on, that it is a very, very young branch, and a lot of the things that we suffer from are a consequence of us, being in those teenage years, I guess.
Right, we could do a full episode just on some of the lists. Actually, some wonderful stuff to reflect on here. But there are, if you want to go further now, check out the show notes, the transcript, of course, as well. It will be found on uxpodcast.com. And click follow, subscribe, or add if you aren't already doing so, and join us again for our next episode. Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side. So, Pad, what's the biggest drawback to voting by mail?
I don't know, James. What is the biggest drawback to voting by mail?
Postage from Russia costs a fortune.